Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This is your teacher Said Imran, lecturer, Department of English, CUST. The course is Research Methods in Linguistics. The course code is ENG 382. This is lecture 10, video 1. And the topic which we are going to discuss today is techniques for defining a research problem. In the start, I would like to give you an outline for this video lecture, which includes, first of all, I would very briefly review some of the concepts we have discussed in the previous video lecture. They are research problem, identification, characteristics, and the deficiency model. Then we will move on to the current topic, which is techniques for defining a research problem. Here we will focus on some techniques which would help us define a research problem appropriately, like state the problem in a general way, understand the nature of the problem, survey the available literature, develop the ideas through discussion, and lastly, we will talk about how to rephrase the research problem. So first of all, let's very briefly review some of the concepts we have come across in the previous video lecture. While talking about research problem, we discussed that it's an issue or challenge that needs to be addressed. This challenge or issue we encounter as researcher in our professional or academic environments. The point is how to identify and then formulate a research problem is the first step in the research process. Although it is very challenging, very difficult, but it's the most important step. Remember, the selection of a research problem may depend on several factors like your knowledge and skills as a researcher, your interest, expertise, motivation, creativity. Similarly, you might come across a research problem in your workplace, or you might get it from a debate in the literature. Sometimes your reading of the literature gives you enough understanding that you find a gap, or sometimes your problem is based on a debate, policy debate in the government circles. We also made it clear that research problem is often confused with research questions. But research questions are the means through which the researcher would be trying to solve the problem, explain the problem. When we are talking about the characteristics, so the characteristics include that in qualitative research, we might have the problem as immature due to a conspicuous lack of theory in the previous research. Sometimes the theories are inaccurate, inappropriate, or incorrect, and sometimes a phenomena needs to be developed further. Now, we need some precautions as far as stating the research problem is concerned, identifying it, and how to formulate it. Some of the precautions are here. For example, we should try to avoid subjects which are over researched or where excessive research has been carried out on some topics or subjects. So we need to avoid those subjects, because for novice researchers, beginners, it's very challenging to throw some fresh light on those subjects on which there is already sufficient research. Similarly, we should try to avoid topics or subjects which are controversial, because for experienced researchers, it is easy to research topics which are controversial in nature, but for beginners, it's quite challenging, because controversial topics, when researched by beginners, so the challenge would be that some circles would approve it while others would disapprove it. So to be on the safe side, we should try to avoid controversial topics or subjects. The next precaution is that we should abstain from narrow or vague problems. When we are trying to identify problems, we should try to avoid problems the nature of which are narrow. The scope is narrow, or the nature is narrow or vague, not clear, because we need clarity for problems to be identified and then stated. Similarly, unfamiliar or unrealistic topics should also be avoided. Topics with whom we are not familiar, we don't have sound academic background, or topics which are unrealistic, which are impractical in nature, should also be avoided. And ultimately, your training and skills as researchers should be kept in mind, keeping in view your qualification, your research qualification, your research training, or your skills, or your previous experiences. They might also shape the way you are approaching a problem. And lastly, when the above precautions are clear, so we should conduct a sort of pilot study or preliminary study in order to get sufficient understanding in the field. Now we are moving towards the topic techniques for research problem. So regarding techniques for research problem, the first technique would be to state the problem in a general way. To state the problem in a general way. Because a well-structured and properly reported study must provide answers to all questions regarding the what, why, when, how, where, and who associated with that study. And when we are trying to state the problem in a general way, we should see for answering the question, we should try to address this question why something is it is. This question is important, addressing the question why. So here, when we are trying to state the problem in a general way, we are following some practical concerns or intellectual interest. We are trying to study the subject or topic thoroughly, and we also conduct some field observations or pilot study. Here, while stating the research problem, requires that we carefully state it, the problem, because it leads towards a solution. The nature of what is going wrong, the problem, very much would set the stage for what can be done. Because if, as a researcher, you want to solve a research problem, you must know, generally, you must know what the problem is. And because no amount of good research can find solutions or can address its problems, if the central issue or the problem which is going to be studied is not clearly pinpointed or not clearly stated. Hence, it is warranted that novice researchers should understand how to identify a research problem and should learn how to properly construct and develop a logical argumentation for a problem statement. Remember that when we are talking about research problem, so research problem is leading towards research questions, and along with the research questions you develop hypotheses, and both these research questions and hypotheses, they come under what is called your goals, research goals or objectives. So while you are trying to address research questions, uh, and that doing so, addressing your research question would help you to solve a problem. And similarly, while developing hypotheses, here you are trying to delimit your study, the focus of your study. So both these components, research questions and hypotheses, they help you uh, address the issue, the central issue which you are interested in, or helping you to solve a problem. The research questions and hypotheses together, they actually determine your methodology. We'll be discussing on in the subsequent lectures the overall design, the methodology, the data collection and interpretation. And methodology is leading towards your results or findings, and that then leads to conclusions. And ultimately, conclusions would answer your research questions and confirming or disconfirming your research hypotheses. And here it's very important that you take expert guidance as well, because after you follow some practical concerns or intellectual interest in you study, you read the topic in the literature thoroughly, you conduct your field observations as well, you are supposed to discuss it with experts in the field, researchers, your supervisors or your colleagues. And this also helps you to narrow down the problem in operational terms. Like from theoretical perspective, sometimes the problem might be vague or quite general. So developing your hypotheses is helping you to narrow down or delimiting the topic. And here you are narrowing down the problem in operational terms. And ultimately, it helps you to consider what is the feasible solution for solving this problem or issue. Because after all, a research study, the goal for a research study would be that what it intends to do, what is the objective of the study in order to address the problem. Research essentially spells what the research study intends to do in order to address the problem. What will this study do? The research goals are operationalized by one or more research questions. While we are developing research questions, so those research questions helps us to operationalize, to focus and precisely pursue what is needed. Research questions also then narrow the purpose or goal into specific questions that the researchers would like to be interested or to get answered for or addressed in the study. So this is how we proceed. Then while doing this, we are also trying to moving towards this second technique, which is understand the nature of the problem. When we are trying to understand the nature of the problem, we should see some of the points. We should give uh, attention to what is the nature and origin, from where it originated, who first raised the problem, and then ultimately a discussion with experts. Here, while we are trying to understand the nature, the roots, or the origin of the problem, we should try to answer or address some of the questions. For example, will a known gap in the body of knowledge be filled? This is important. While going through literature review, we should look for the gap which our study is going to fill. Similarly, will some previous research be replicated or expanded by looking at a different category of participants, environments, and construct variables? Again, will previous research be expanded by more thoroughly examining some identifiable aspects? Are there specific identifiable and documented problems with the currently available solutions? Remember, as a novice researcher, in the beginning, we should understand that research problems should not be based solely in wholly on our personal observations and or experiences. Similarly, research problems should not be based on a comparison of two sets of data for the sake of comparison. Uh, Thirdly, research problems should not be based on a correlation of two sets of data. And lastly, research problems should not be based on an investigation that yields a yes or no answer, because such questions will offer very little contribution to the body of knowledge. And this is what establishing the limit, which is attached with how you are developing your hypotheses, because developing hypotheses or developing your research questions is in fact you are bringing limits, you are delimiting your topic and focus. uh, Similarly, the objectives, you are operationalizing your study. The next technique is literature survey. Here, reading of the literature is important for uh, refinement of the research problem. First of all, we consult literature for problem definition, uh, operational definitions especially. We are supposed to report relevant theories in the field, and we are trying to understand what data is available in the literature, research data, that helps us to refine our techniques. and that in turn helps us to identify gaps in the existing theory. Now, remember that while personal interest, hunches, and gut feelings are far more important in the start for novice researchers, when they are starting, but then you have to limit the domain on the basis of your personal interest, and you decide what is appropriate and what is useful to offer as a viable starting point towards identifying a research problem. Personal experiences are potentially useful because they offer you some possible solutions based on your experience. Because in your day-to-day life as a researcher, you come across situation in which in your day-to-day life you come across situations in which the current state of affairs is not really working for you, and in those situations you feel there is a potential for research problem you can identify. However, it is important to remember that uh, uh, an organization, if has a specific problem, that does not directly constitute that problem as a research problem. Here, in order to address this issue, as a researcher, you must find out what things are already known about your topic of interest, because you cannot uh, get something good by just reinventing the wheel. So here you need to read scholarly literature, and in scholarly literature you can go and identify the leading journals, conference proceedings, and scholars in the domain of interest, your field. Similarly, you do your searches using techniques such as searching on keyboard, Google Scholars, uh, and especially you consult the recently completed PhD thesis or even MPhil thesis, and try to identify gaps or holes in the body of knowledge which is identified in the scholarly article. Moreover, you tell what is already known. The existing literature is likely to tell you what is not known in the area or what still needs to be done. The next technique for defining a research problem is they develop the ideas through discussion. This discussion might be with colleagues and teachers and supervisors or other experts in the field, and such discussions, they develop and refine your ideas regarding your project, and it helps you how to operationalize those ideas. It leads to the review of your design, because soon after you do your literature review, so in different literature sources, the topic might be discussed from different angles, because scholarly research cannot be established through a single source, so you consult many sources, and it is unlikely that any two journals or books would be treating the topic in the same way. So therefore, as a researcher, you need to put together the insights you gain from a number of scholarly articles or sources, and you try to integrate the work from different but related fields. And you are trying to compose a generalization based upon multiple specific instances. So once you identify a potential research worthy problem, it encourages you to seek further guidance and feedback. So feedback on the potential research problem can be done through two approaches. The first is that you are seeking the feedback uh, uh, which can be gained from experienced researchers. And the second is that you get such feedbacks from experienced researcher is but in uh, conference proceedings. And in such discussions and getting feedback would help you not only review the design, but it also helps you to understand and uh, review some of the research techniques and procedures which you would be following. And the last technique is that you rephrase the problem into a working proposition, or as we have discussed, research hypotheses. You are also supposed to define technical terms, and it is called operationalizing the study or operational definitions. And you state basic assumptions, which is part of your uh, research hypotheses, because it gives you a clear direction. It gave it through this you are delimiting your studies as well. And then you provide the criteria for selection of the problem. And this is the section of scope of the study, or purpose, objectives, or the benefits it will offer. These are the references you can consult. Thank you.